give a talk on a poet-philosopher from Martinique called Edouard Glissant. And I have been interested in working on Edouard Glissant's work, particularly at least 4 or 5 concepts that he's been developing that I feel that represent a contemporary situation in culture, politics, and aesthetics. And these concepts include thinking from the archipelago. We happen to be in Malta, but I wrote the paper thinking about Martinique, but I'm glad to be on an archipelago. And then creolization, relation, opacity, and seeing the world as one, basically. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the archipelago. I usually like to just talk, but when Chris asked me to do this paper, it was short term, so I had to write it fast, and that's what I'm going to read to you. And I hope you don't get too bored listening to a reading, because I'm usually more effective just talking to you, but I don't think I can handle these concepts and just wing it, as my daughter would say. So the title is The World Seen from the Eye of the Archipelago. Edouard Glissant was fond of saying, agis dans ton lieu, pense avec le monde. Use your geographic location or position to think with the world. For him, this expression was appropriate for capturing the simultaneity of the local and the global, the push and pull between the details and the whole, the particular and the universal. We call local the place where we belong. It is the fabric of our lived experience and collective consciousness, and as such, it is unavoidable, even though it always threatens to fix our identities in place. The global, on the other hand, wants to uproot and obliterate identities everywhere. To think with the world from one's place is Glissant's way of de-emphasizing a local that closes in itself, but that also avoids passive assimilation of everything coming from outside. It is in this sense that Glissant defines the archipelago as an open space that is generative of ideas and discourses, a meeting point for diverse people and cultures from Africa, America, Asia, and Europe, and a space that is also open to assaults by cyclones, hurricanes, high tides, volcanoes, and human invaders before they reach continents. As such, the archipelago is a place that is well aware of its fragility and that of the entire planet. It has the capacity to think with the world, but also knows how to tremble with the world, how to create common grounds with other localities near and far. To be on Glissant's archipelago is like traveling the world while staying in one place. Glissant's concept of the archipelago as a place that thinks with the world is in opposition to that of thinking in the world. He described the latter as a logocentric disposition that reignites the ideas of discovery and colonization of the planet. To think in the world is to think with insularity and to only perceive the world in one's own image. Glissant calls it continental thinking that is bent on silencing every other voice and writing world history with a capital H. In the West and elsewhere, continental thinking proceeds with one religion and expansionist economic, linguistic, and civilizational systems to imagine itself as encompassing the totality of the lived experience of the whole world. The trajectory of continental thinking is linear, violent, and tragic in its effort to maintain the purity of blood against contamination. Continental thinking, or the practice of thinking in, whether in Africa, Asia, and especially Europe, conceives of identity in a closed and absolutist transparent light, shunning any notion of creolization and relation. The Tempest by Shakespeare, with its binary opposition of Caliban and Prospero, nature and culture, is for Glissant one of the foundational texts of the continental urge to write the history, theory, and literature of the world from the point of view of the same against the other. As Western literature became meta-literature, encompassing all writings and marginalizing the oral traditions and sacred texts of the rest of the world, the Western ratio and imago were also imposed on the world as universal and as universal values and aesthetics. The other had to become transparent in their adaptation of the manners of the West, in other words, be assimilated or annihilated. That's why Glissant insists on thinking with the world to get us out of the pattern of immutable identities, monotheistic religious intolerance, linguistic and economic imperialism, and to introduce us to a new chapter of our humanities and histories of the world based on the lived experience of everyone. I am talking about a chapter of the world history in which people's suffering will not pass unseen or without an echo, where all the languages will have an equal claim to truth and everyone will have the right to name themselves. This is without, however, falling into the trap of that which it was necessary to fight against, or to put it in Glissant's words, following, in French, la voie du monolinguisme impérialiste occidental, succombant ainsi à ce qu'elle veut combattre. Falling in the path of Western monolinguistic imperialism, which it was supposed to defeat. Glissant's poesept, and by poesept here, I'm referring to the concept of poetry and concept. So, a colleague of mine in the name of Patrick Chamoiseau, Martinican writer who's famous for writing Texaco, coined this term, poesept, as opposed to concept. Glissant's poesept of being in one's place and thinking with is also indebted to other Caribbean writers and poets such as Camo Braithwaite, Derek Walcott, and recently Patrick Chamoiseau. It involves long-standing poetic studies of the lived experiences and cultures of the Caribbean, away from the cliches and generalization of Caribbean identity and landscape in the romantic literatures of Europe and the Negritude movement. Archipelagic thought refers to discourses that are both attentive to the specificity of every space and to the cadence of the world. In these spaces of encounter and connivance, cultural identities are permanently being questioned. Citing Camo Braithwaite, Glissant argues that the Caribbean seas are pathways as well as an introduction to the Americas. Archipelagic identities are therefore rhizomatic and connected through a submarine relation. Glissant believes in the resilience and healing power of archipelagic thought and thoughts emanating from other small countries that he called petit pays that have been tested first by cataclysmic changes due to human invasion and natural disasters. The bad winds of economic, health, and environmental upheavals pass through the archipelago before reaching continents. It is believed, therefore, that seeing the world from the eye of a small countries better prepares the world for the forecast of impending hardship and the reflexes to survive or avoid them altogether by being less aggressive and environmentally conscious. There is a beautiful chapter in Poétique de la Relation, which is a book by Glissant, Poétique de la Relation, Poetics of Relation. And the chapter is called Plage Noire, Black Beach, in which Glissant articulates an indispensability of place and the imperative of thinking with the world. He is at home in Martinique, looking at the beach of the Diamant as seasons roll in and out, the sand turning black then white, the waves digging into the ground and revealing black rocks. At times, one can see the marks of recent cyclones and hurricanes through the exposed roots of coconut and other water trees. It is natural enough to observe these cyclical occurrences take place on the beach, and to attribute the regular interchange between white and black sand to the subterranean relation between the ocean and the volcano moving underneath the Mount Pelée. Glissant's attention was specifically caught by the sight of a young man walking daily down the beach from one end to the other, who had gone on strike against speech. It was said that several residents in the area of the Diamant Beach, including the young man's mother, had despaired in their attempt to make him utter even one word. Needless to say, Glissant was intrigued by the regular beach walkers' withdrawal from verbal communication and the pace of his strides on the sand and rocks, which seemed to be dictated by the changing winds and cadences of the waves. So haunted had Glissant become by the silent marcher that he could not sometimes guess when he was going to accelerate or decelerate his pace when he was passing the gate of the poet. Glissant, like the other resident of the Diamant before him, had obstinately attempted to communicate through words with the man. It was at the end of these vain efforts of noise and shouts that he began to wonder what was it that led the man to create an absence of speech around himself. On a nice Sunday, the Diamant Beach was an ideal public space for discussing the island's problems, a space to demonstrate one's eloquence in the deconstruction of French assimilation, the Caribbean identity politics, economic dependency, and why Martinique was or was not like the other Caribbean islands. One could hear from afar people hurling words at their problems, as if the solution was in the mastery of French or Creole languages, or yelling, Glissant calls it hurlement, at one another, words of violence, ideological words, religious words, loving words, words of hate, escapist words, and racist and sexist words. It was finally with gestures, body language, that Glissant was able to get through to the man who, to be in tune with the seasons, had entered into a faster and faster rhythm of marching. Glissant had noticed at the same time that the man was getting skinnier and skinnier, looking like he was being lifted in the air by the winds and barely able to keep his pants up around his waist. Understandably, Glissant was very moved by the fact that he could finally provoke a response from the man whose self-imposed muteness had seemed impossible to communicate with. From that point on, the two of them entered into a new complicity and connivance through gestures of hands, head nods, and eye contacts. They uncovered together the signs of a world beyond that which mobilized words to describe the meaning of mundane life on the beach. They both consented to creating wordless language to communicate the interior discourses and intuitive relation between things seen and unseen, human and animal, the depth of oceans and its surfaces, winds and landscapes. In his attempt to communicate with the man, Glissant realized the futility of depending on pre-established discourses for providing cures to man-made problems on the archipelago. Since such discourses are also borrowed from continental thought systems that promulgated themselves as universal truths, indifferent to any specificity of the archipelago. According to Glissant, what we learn from the man marching against the efficacy of universal truths is first that they hide their own particularity by violently attacking other particularities. And second, that they have no time nor do they consent to think with or enter into a relationship with the differences and opacities of other localities like the archipelago. Thus, they can only function as ideologies of enslavement, instruments for producing absolutist identities, profit-making devices, monotheistic religions, and machines of legitimation, discrimination, conquest, and colonization. Continental thought is unwavering, always obsessed with its own image in the mirror, which it projects on the world as natural and universal. It quickly turns into a meta-language by the time it reaches the archipelago, where its truth has no bearing on the lived experience and collective unconscious of the population. It can only function in the archipelago as a meta-language for escaping reality or as a weapon for a minority of oppositional intellectuals vying for continental legitimation. That's why on a nice Sunday on the Diamant Beach, individuals hurl continental slogans at one another, not so much as an effort to think with an idea coming from another location in the world, but as strategies of drowning out the shouts of the adversaries, to make everyone deaf and blind to the echo and sight of the suffering of the world around them. Glissant warns us that we have to be careful, or our mimicry of continental thought will leave us only with words that silence other words, that shut people up and even extinguish speech itself. And to put it in Glissant's beautiful French, c'est un paradoxe que tant de violence partout ferme sur la même élémentarité de langage, quand ce n'est pas sur l'extinction de la parole. It's really the extinction of speech. For Glissant, a lone marcher has chosen silence to protest against this non-communicability of language, where words have lost their poetic power to provoke or our imaginaries. Everything has become a cliché, and the human suffering everywhere has lost its echo. Glissant had to first enter into a communion, become one with the environment of the Diamant, to feel first the energy of the ocean as it swept away from its submarine depth, the black ashes, and then the cadences of the waves, dutifully alternating black and white sand on the shores. All these movements are accorded by the winds, which also conduct the steps of the solitary marcher. Clearly, the people on the beach who are only attentive to their own noise have disconnected with the trembling movement of the world, the languages of the acceleration of the winds, and the cadences of time, all of which mirror differences over places, mirrors differently over places on the planet where the ecology is trying to say something to human beings and other living species. The man who has left everything aside to dedicate his life to a mimesis of the seasonal and circular actions of the planet has thus renewed an authentic relation with the totality of the world. He has consented to receive deliberately and intuitively all the messages in all the languages of the first poets who had also dedicated themselves to the unending search for the meaning of oneness of the world. This is, as Glissant calls it, one world in relation, the totality of the world held together by an interdependent connectivity without any guarantee of closure. For Glissant, the same necessity should compel everyone, everywhere, to be possessed differently by the cadences of the world. Only thus could we escape from the tyranny of monolithic continental philosophies, from the monotheism that silence all other religions, the economies organized in hierarchies along developmental phases instead of circular and cyclical seasons. Only thus could we have a chance to escape systems that take themselves for the totality of world history with a capital H, while excluding the majority of world voices and languages. Archipelagic thinking, open and rhizomatic in its liaison and affiliation, teaches us to give in to easy and transparent solutions, not to give in to easy and transparent solutions at the expense of the complex, chaotic, unpredictable, and diverse ways in which the visible and invisible energies of the world are connected. Toward the end of the story of the beach, of the Black Beach, we see the solitary man moving faster and faster to stay connected to this cyclical movements of the world. He is afraid to slow down lest he falls down and a part of the world dies with him. Meanwhile, people on the Diamond Beach amplify the noise around him for fear of being left behind by the linear time, the absolutist time set for them by continental thinking. The totalizing I'm referring to here is not totalitarian as we have seen with the writing of world history from a Western continental perspective, but taking Glissant's account of the life world at the Diamant, I want to argue that any consideration of the sums of the world's histories would not only be inclusive of the totality of the world languages and cultures, but also the intuitions and pulses which are produced by the differences and specificities of location and the transaction of the life world with the natural environment. It is in this sense that I understand the emergence of new forms of identification and identity formation in lieu of the old universalizing models of filiation and nationalism provided by continental thought systems. The move to delegitimize a colonialist and deficient form of totalizing is not a ruse to return to a revival of dormant traditions, which were silenced by centuries of oppression, but a critical approach to living in a world suddenly united in spite of the will of the former colonizers and against the desires of profit-oriented globalizing forces of today. For Glissant, The aim is not so much to master the colonizing and imperialist tools of the masters in order to turn them against a designated target or to isolate oneself from the world. Such an endeavor would be Manichaean at best or banal and derisory at worst. The goal is to start a new chapter of the humanities in search of a totality that takes into account a planetarian worldview, and that is incommensurable and unpredictable, opaque, and visibly chaotic. As difficult and daunting the task may seem, it will lead us to a new chapter of world history where the philosophies and civilizations are not coming only from the West and where writing is hierarchically positioned above speech, but instead where the lessons and voices can be heard from everywhere else, especially from those places that were previously silenced by continental thinking. We need a new approach to history, literature, and philosophy in which everyone will have the time to name themselves. As we have seen with the silent marcher at Diamond Beach, perhaps if we understood the language of his muteness and gestures, we would be better prepared to resist the dehumanization brought on local societies by capitalism and globalization. Every island is an open-ended discourse toward something new and unpredictable, yet full of warning and lessons for things to come on the continent. As Glissant puts it, in the Archipelago, in French, il dit « La dialectique du dehors-dedans rejoint l'assaut terre-mer. C'est seulement pour ceux qui sont amarrés au continent Europe que l'insularité constitue prison. L'imaginaire des Antilles nous libère de l'étouffement. » Quick summarizing translation of this, the dialectics of outside-inside is tied to the assault on land-sea. It's only for those who are attached to the European continent that insularity means imprisonment. The Caribbean imaginary frees us from suffocation. I want to conclude this. To think openly and with the world is an archipelagic way of taking the pulse of the world. A surface and subterranean relation to it, a consent to be a citizen of what Glissant calls tout monde, and a capacity to rise above the appearances and allures of the benefit of unbridled economic development and ideological noises. For Glissant, what the archipelago teaches us is how to share our chances and destinies, how to poetically weave ties with others, human and non-human element of the planet, as he has done with the man on the beach, how to connect all the voices of the world and create a solidarity between intuition from place to place and across time. Now, I had a long quote here, but I'm just going to read. The French is really beautiful, but I'm just going to read you the translation. I'm sorry. Here is what Glissant says. We discover each day that our most unexpected and almost the most secretly hidden thoughts and reactions, our inspirations and inventions, were simultaneously expressed or felt somewhere far on earth, in the most foreign of languages and under the strangest possible of ways, by unknown people whose existence we could barely have guessed, and with whom we share no visible determining ties or relation. And end quote. It's really the attempt to create solidarities between this intuition that's important to Glissant. I'll stop here. Thank you.